he controlled $25 billion a year. He bribed presidents. He killed rivals. Then, in 1993, everything collapsed. A bullet found him on December 2, but not before he left a trail of blood across Colombia's most violent decades. What you don't know is that this wasn't just the end of a man, it was the final chapter in the war between a godfather and an entire nation. The boy who would become Pablo Escobar was born in 1949 in the slums of Medellin, Colombia, a city where poverty clung to the streets like a second skin. His father was a carpenter who drank himself into oblivion, his mother worked as a seamstress for barely enough to feed 3 children. But Pablo saw opportunity in chaos. By 15, he was smuggling stolen goods through Medellin's docks, and by 20, he had already sold his first kilo of cocaine. The drug trade wasn't just money, it was power. And Pablo wanted more than wealth, he wanted to rewrite the rules. In 1976, a young Pablo Escobar walked into a Medellin warehouse with a suitcase full of cash and a plan. He offered a cut to the local mafia in exchange for protection, but when they refused, he burned their homes down. The message was clear: this wasn't just another dealer, this was a warlord in the making. By 1980, his Medellin cartel had become the most powerful drug syndicate on earth. They controlled every inch of the cocaine pipeline from South American jungles to New York streets. And they didn't just move drugs, they moved money, power, and fear. Before we continue, if you are new to Cartel Chronicles, subscribe now and hit the bell. New true crime documentaries every week. The Medellin cartel wasn't just a
drug empire, it was an industry. By 1985, they were shipping 20 tons of cocaine a month, enough to fund entire cities. They had their own private army, the Cali Boys, who executed enemies with surgical precision. And they weren't shy about showing off. Pablo's mansion in Envigado featured gold-plated toilets and a personal zoo with lions that roamed his living room. But power came at a cost. In 1983 alone, over 200 judges, politicians, and police officers were murdered, all to silence anyone who might stand against him. The turning point came in 1987 when Pablo's closest ally, Carlos Letter, betrayed him. The Medellin planeload incident, a $15 million cocaine shipment intercepted by the DEA, exposed the cartel's reach and made Escobar a global fugitive. But instead of retreating, he doubled down. He bought a private jet to transport drugs across continents, funded terrorist attacks on U.S. military bases in Colombia, and even threatened Ronald Reagan with a $10 million ransom for a single bullet. The DEA had been hunting him for 8 years, but now, they had his name. If this story is blowing your mind, smash that like button, it costs nothing and helps us reach more people. By 1992, the Colombian government finally cracked down on Escobar's operations. A brutal police raid in Medellin left 30 cartel members dead, and Pablo himself was arrested, only to escape hours later through a tunnel dug under his mansion. The final move came in December 1993 when the DEA launched Operation Trojan Shield. In a hail of bullets on a Medellin rooftop, Pablo Escobar was shot dead at 44 years old, not by a bullet from a rival, but by the very government he had tried to outwit. The legacy of Pablo Escobar is etched into Colombia's scars. His death didn't end the drug trade, it just made it more dangerous. The Medellin cartel fractured into smaller factions that continue to war for dominance today. But his story also changed the world: stricter anti-drug laws, increased U.S.-Colombia cooperation, and a cultural reckoning with the violence of addiction. His name is now synonymous with greed, power, and the price of survival in a land torn by war. Drop a comment below: which cartel should we expose next? We read every one. Subscribe to Cartel Chronicles, ring the bell, and we will see you in the next untold story. The immediate aftermath of Pablo Escobar's death was anything but peaceful. The Medellin cartel, once a monolithic force, splintered into warring factions, each vying for control over its empire. Without Escobar's iron grip and charismatic leadership, the cartel's infrastructure crumbled. Some members turned to violence, launching brutal campaigns against rivals and law enforcement in a desperate bid to maintain influence. Others fled, scattering across Colombia and beyond to rebuild under new names and identities. The vacuum left by Escobar's assassination did not simply weaken the drug trade, it transformed it into a fragmented, more chaotic battlefield where survival depended on ruthlessness and adaptability. Yet even as the cartel collapsed, its shadow lingered over Colombia. The government, long cowed by Escobar's power and the violence that had defined his reign, found itself in a precarious position. For years, officials had negotiated with Escobar, offering him immunity from prosecution in exchange for halting his operations. When he refused, they watched helplessly as his empire grew into an existential threat to national stability. His death, while a symbolic victory, did not erase the damage already done. The country was left grappling with the consequences of a war waged on its soil by men who saw themselves as revolutionaries rather than criminals. The U.S., which had been locked in a high-stakes game of cat-and-mouse with Escobar for decades, seized the moment to deepen its involvement in Colombia's drug crisis. The death of Pablo Escobar was not just a blow to the Medellin cartel, it was proof that Washington's strategy of targeting cartel leaders could work. This led to a surge in U.S.-Colombia cooperation, with American agencies pouring resources into dismantling what remained of the drug trade. Programs like Plan Colombia, launched in the late 1990s, aimed to eradicate coca cultivation and disrupt trafficking networks through military intervention and economic incentives. While these efforts had some success, they also sparked controversy. Critics argued that the U.S. was complicit in human rights abuses committed by Colombian security forces, while others pointed out that the drug trade simply adapted, shifting production to new regions and evolving into more sophisticated operations. Colombia's struggle with addiction and organized crime took a different turn after Escobar's death. The Medellin cartel had once dominated not just the drug trade but also the very fabric of Colombian society, embedding itself in politics, culture, and everyday life. Its collapse left behind a legacy that was impossible to erase. In Medellin itself, where Escobar's influence had been most profound, the city became a symbol of both resilience and trauma. Streets once scarred by violence began to heal, but the scars remained. The cartel's reign had ushered in an era of unprecedented brutality, with thousands killed in targeted assassinations, bombings, and kidnappings. Even after Escobar was gone, the cycle of violence did not end, it merely changed shape. In the decades that followed, Colombia became a battleground for new cartels emerging from the ashes of the Medellin Empire. The Cali cartel, which had long operated in the shadows of its northern rival, seized the opportunity to rise as the dominant force. Unlike Escobar, whose public persona was flamboyant and theatrical, the Cali cartel's leaders preferred secrecy and subtlety. They brokered deals with foreign governments, laundered billions through legitimate businesses, and even infiltrated political institutions in ways that made Escobar's operations look almost naive by comparison. The Cali cartel's reign lasted until the early 2000s, when its own internal conflicts and a relentless campaign by Colombian authorities led to its eventual dismantling. Yet for all the progress made against organized crime, Colombia's relationship with the drug trade remains complex. Today, coca cultivation continues in regions like Putumayo and Caqueta, where poverty and instability have created fertile ground for new criminal enterprises. The legacy of Escobar and his successors lives on not just in the shadows of trafficking networks but also in the policies that seek to combat them. The war on drugs, once a cornerstone of U.S.-Colombia relations, has evolved into a more nuanced approach focused on crop substitution and community development. But as any observer knows, the war is far from over. Pablo Escobar's story, however, continues to captivate the world in ways that go beyond his role as a drug kingpin. His life has been mythologized in films, books, and even music, often blurring the line between fact and fiction. The man who once declared himself the king of cocaine became a figure of both admiration and condemnation, a Robin Hood to some, a monster to others. This duality is perhaps the most enduring aspect of his legacy. In parts of Colombia, especially among younger generations unfamiliar with the era of cartel violence, Escobar is still seen as a folk hero, a symbol of resistance against an oppressive system that failed to protect the poor. To others, He remains an emblem of the destructive power of greed and the chaos it can unleash on innocent lives. The cultural reckoning with addiction, which Escobar's story helped ignite, has since spread far beyond Colombia's borders. His rise and fall underscored the global dimensions of drug addiction, a problem that transcends geography and ideology. In the United States, where Escobar's reign in the 1980s and 90s coincided with a surge in cocaine use, his name became synonymous with the dangers of the war on drugs itself. The policies enacted in response to his influence, mandatory minimum sentences, militarized crackdowns, and the criminalization of drug users, have been both praised for their toughness and criticized for their human cost. Escobar's legacy thus serves as a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of well-intentioned efforts to combat organized crime. As we reflect on the final chapters of Pablo Escobar's life, it is clear that his story is not one of simple triumph or tragedy but of profound complexity. He was a man who built an empire out of desperation and ambition, leaving behind a world forever altered by his choices. His death did not bring peace to Colombia, it merely marked the beginning of a new chapter in a country's long struggle with violence, corruption, and the lure of power. Yet even now, more than 3 decades after Escobar was killed, his name echoes through the corridors of history, a reminder that no man, no matter how powerful, can escape the consequences of their own making. So what comes next? The story of Pablo Escobar may have reached its end, but the story of Colombia, and the cartels that continue to shape its destiny, is far from over. In the next episode of Cartel Chronicles, we will turn our gaze to another shadowy figure who rose from obscurity to become a kingpin in their own right, the enigmatic and ruthless leader of the Norte del Valle cartel, a group that would prove just as dangerous, and perhaps more elusive, than Escobar himself. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on where we should go next. Subscribe to Cartel Chronicles, ring the bell, and join us for an exploration of the untold stories behind the world's most notorious drug empires.